The cool autumn breeze swept through the quiet streets of Cedar Grove as Officer James Mitchell settled into his patrol car for another night shift. The digital clock on his dashboard blinked 11:45 p.m., and the veteran police officer of 15 years took a long sip from his coffee thermos, preparing himself for the usual Friday night routine. The suburban neighborhood was typically peaceful at this hour, with most families already tucked away in their homes. Street lamps cast long shadows across the empty roads, and only the occasional cat would dart across his path. Officer Mitchell liked these quieter shifts. They gave him time to think and reflect on his years of service to the community. As he turned onto Maple Street, he thought about his own family. His daughter had just started college, and his wife was probably waiting up for his midnight check-in call. It was their little tradition, one that had helped keep their marriage strong through all the challenges of police work. The radio crackled with routine updates from dispatch, mostly minor incidents from other parts of town. Mitchell responded mechanically to each call, continuing his patrol route through the familiar streets. He'd driven these same roads thousands of times, knowing every corner, every stop sign, and every spot where teenagers liked to gather after dark. Just as he was about to turn onto Oak Avenue, something caught his attention. A dark blue sedan ahead of him was moving strangely, weaving slightly between the lanes. The car was traveling about 5 miles under the speed limit, which wasn't unusual for this time of night, but the erratic movement set off warning bells in Mitchell's experienced mind. Possible DUI on Oak Avenue, he muttered to himself, flicking on his dashboard camera. Years of experience had taught him to document everything, even routine traffic stops. He watched the sedan for another 30 seconds, noting how it drifted toward the center line before jerking back into its lane. Officer Mitchell reached for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 247. I'm going to conduct a traffic stop on a dark blue sedan, license plate." He squinted through the darkness, reading out the numbers and letters illuminated by his headlights. "Copy that, Unit 247, the dispatcher's voice crackled back. Mitchell hit the switches for his patrol car's lights, painting the quiet street in alternating flashes of red and blue. The sedan continued for a moment, as if the driver hadn't noticed, then slowly began to pull over to the curb. The car's movements were hesitant, almost uncertain, not the typical behavior of an experienced driver. As he parked behind the sedan, Mitchell noticed several things that seemed off. The car was well maintained and fairly new, not the typical vehicle for an impaired driver. There was a baby on board sticker in the rear window, and he could see movement inside the car that seemed frantic. Following standard procedure, Mitchell grabbed his flashlight and stepped out of his patrol car. The cool night air hit his face as he adjusted his utility belt and straightened his uniform, habits ingrained from years on the force. As he approached the driver's side, he kept his right hand near his hip, more from training than any sense of danger. The windows of the sedan were slightly fogged up, making it difficult to see inside clearly. Mitchell could hear muffled sounds coming from within, sounds that made him pause mid-step. Was that crying? "Cedar Grove Police Department," he announced in his authoritative yet calm voice, developed over years of traffic stops. "Please roll down your window." There was a moment of hesitation, followed by the electric whir of the window motor. As the glass lowered, Officer Mitchell pointed his flashlight beam into the car, following standard procedure. What he saw in that moment made him forget every bit of his training. His hand, steady through countless dangerous situations, began to tremble slightly. The beam of his flashlight revealed something so unexpected, so concerning, that for a moment, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. The veteran officer felt the color drain from his face as he processed the scene before him. In the driver's seat, barely able to see over the steering wheel, sat a young boy who couldn't have been more than 12 years old. His small hands gripped the wheel tightly, and tears streamed down his face. But what made Mitchell's heart nearly stop was the sound coming from the back seat, the unmistakable wailing of an infant. Officer James Mitchell had seen a lot in his 15 years on the force, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. As he stood there in the flashing lights, he knew this would be no ordinary traffic stop, and his next decisions would change lives forever. Officer Mitchell's training kicked in despite his shock, and he quickly assessed the situation before him. The boy in the driver's seat was trembling, his knuckles white from gripping the steering wheel. Tears streamed down his young face, illuminated by the harsh glow of the patrol car's lights behind them. "Son, I need you to turn off the engine," Mitchell said, keeping his voice gentle but firm. The boy fumbled with the keys, his small hands shaking as he followed the officer's instructions. The baby's cries from the back seat grew louder, filling the night air with urgent wails. Moving his flashlight beam to the back seat, Mitchell saw an infant car seat. Inside was a baby girl, her face flushed red and tear-stained. She looked to be no more than 8 months old, dressed in pink pajamas with little rabbits on them. The sight made Mitchell's heart clench. As a father himself, he could tell something was terribly wrong with the child. "My name is Officer Mitchell," he said, crouching down to the driver's window to be at eye level with the boy. "Can you tell me your name and what's going on here?" The boy wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, trying to compose himself. "I'm Tommy Henderson, sir," he managed between sniffles. "That's my baby sister Emma. She's really sick, and I didn't know what else to do." Mitchell noticed the boy was wearing Superman pajamas and house slippers. Clearly, this had been an emergency departure from home. "Where are your parents, Tommy?" he asked, already reaching for his radio to call for backup. "Mom's at work," Tommy explained, his voice cracking. "She's a nurse at Cedar Grove Hospital. She works the night shift, and I couldn't reach her on her phone. Emma started burning up really bad, and she wouldn't stop crying. I tried everything Mom taught me. I gave her medicine, but her forehead just kept getting hotter." The officer reached into the back seat to feel the baby's forehead. His eyes widened at the heat radiating from the infant's skin. This wasn't just a slight fever. The child needed medical attention immediately. "What about your father, or any other relatives nearby?" Mitchell asked, though he already suspected the answer from Tommy's expression. "It's just us and Mom," Tommy replied, fresh tears welling up. "Dad left when Emma was born. Our neighbors are all old, and they take their hearing aids out at night. I knocked on 3 doors, but nobody answered. I was so scared, Officer Mitchell. Emma just kept crying and getting hotter." Mitchell's flashlight beam caught something on the passenger seat. A worn notebook with addresses and phone numbers, all crossed out. The boy had clearly tried to find help before taking this desperate measure. "I know I'm not supposed to drive," Tommy continued, his words tumbling out faster now. "Mom taught me how to start the car for emergencies, just in case something happened to her while she was driving. But she never said I should actually drive it. I'm sorry, I'm really sorry, but Emma needed help, and I didn't know what else to do." The baby's cries had turned into weak whimpers, which worried Mitchell even more. He'd seen enough sick children in his career to know that when a crying baby suddenly gets quieter, it's often a bad sign. Making a quick decision, Mitchell pulled out his phone and dialed dispatch. "This is Officer Mitchell. I need an ambulance at..." He paused, looking at Tommy. "Where do you live, son?" 1247 Maple Street, Tommy answered promptly. "But we were trying to get to the hospital. It's only 10 blocks away." Mitchell spoke into his phone again. "Cancel that ambulance. I'll be transporting 2 minors to Cedar Grove Hospital myself. Contact hospital security and have them locate Sarah Henderson. She's a nurse on duty tonight. Tell her it's about her children." Turning back to Tommy, he opened the driver's door. "All right, buddy, slide over to the passenger seat. I'm going to drive you and your sister to the hospital myself. It'll be faster than waiting for an ambulance." Relief flooded Tommy's face as he quickly unbuckled his seatbelt. As he climbed over the center console, Mitchell noticed the phone book and phone book pages scattered on the floor, evidence of all the ways this young boy had tried to get help before resorting to driving. The veteran officer's heart ached as he settled into the driver's seat. In 15 years of police work, he'd never encountered a situation quite like this, a 12-year-old boy forced to make an impossible choice between breaking the law and watching his baby sister suffer. As he started the engine, Mitchell knew that sometimes doing the right thing meant looking beyond the letter of the law to see the heart of the matter. Officer Mitchell carefully maneuvered the Henderson family's sedan through the quiet streets while Tommy sat anxiously in the passenger seat, his eyes constantly darting to the rearview mirror to check on his sister. The police cruiser followed behind them, its lights still flashing to ensure they'd have a clear path to the hospital. "Tell me what happened tonight, Tommy," Mitchell said gently, hoping to keep the boy calm while also understanding the full situation. "Start from the beginning." Tommy twisted the hem of his Superman pajama top as he spoke. "Emma was fine when Mom left for work at 7. She gave me the usual instructions. Heat up the dinner she left in the fridge, give Emma her bottle at 8, and put her to bed by 8:30. The boy's maturity struck Mitchell. At an age when most kids would be playing video games or hanging out with friends, Tommy was essentially running a household. Everything was normal until about 10:30. Tommy continued, his voice shaking. Emma woke up crying, but not her usual cry. It was different, like she was in pain. When I checked on her, she was burning hot and her face was all red. Mitchell navigated a turn, listening intently as the story unfolded. The baby's whimpers from the back seat had grown weaker, increasing his concern. I did everything Mom taught me, Tommy said, pride mixing with fear in his voice. I checked her temperature with the ear thermometer. It was 103.8. I gave her the baby Tylenol from the medicine cabinet and tried calling Mom at work, but it went straight to voicemail. Sometimes she can't answer when she's with patients. A car ahead of them pulled over at the sound of the police sirens, and Mitchell smoothly passed it. You're a very responsible brother, Tommy. What happened next? I tried everything. Tommy's voice cracked. I called Mrs. Peterson next door, but she's really old and takes out her hearing aids at night. I knocked on the Johnsons' door across the street, but they're on vacation. I even tried Mr. Garcia 2 houses down, but his car wasn't there. Mitchell noticed the boy's hands were still trembling. That must have been scary, being all alone with a sick baby. Tommy nodded, wiping fresh tears. I kept checking her temperature, and it went up to 104.2. Mom always said if it goes above 104, it's really serious. I found the phone book and started calling everyone I could think of. Mom's friends from work, our old neighbors, even my teacher from last year. Nobody answered. The hospital was now just a few blocks away, its emergency room lights glowing in the distance. Mitchell pressed the accelerator slightly, knowing every minute counted. Then Emma started making these weird gasping sounds. Tommy's voice dropped to a whisper. Her eyes looked strange, and she wasn't crying as loud anymore. I remembered Mom showing me where she keeps the car keys for emergencies, and I knew I had to do something. You made a tough choice in a scary situation, Mitchell said, understanding the boy's dilemma. How did you know how to drive? A hint of a smile crossed Tommy's tear-stained face. Mom lets me move the car in the driveway sometimes when she needs to clean the garage. She taught me about the pedals and the gear shift, just in case something ever happened to her while she was driving. She said knowledge is important in emergencies. They pulled into the hospital's emergency entrance, where 2 nurses were already waiting, alerted by dispatch. Mitchell quickly parked the car and hurried to get Emma from the back seat while Tommy scrambled out of the passenger side. As the nurses rushed forward with a small gurney, Mitchell carefully lifted Emma from her car seat. Her skin was burning to the touch, and her breathing seemed labored. Tommy stood close by, his small hand clutching his sister's even as the nurses began their assessment. Temperature's 104.5, one nurse announced, causing Tommy to burst into fresh tears. I tried to get here faster, he sobbed. I was just so scared of driving. I kept going slow because I didn't want to crash. Mitchell placed a comforting hand on Tommy's shoulder as they watched the nurses wheel Emma through the emergency room doors. You did the right thing, son. You put your sister's life first, and you drove as safely as you could. That shows incredible judgment for someone your age. As they followed the medical team inside, Mitchell couldn't help but think that in his entire career, he'd never met a 12-year-old who'd shown such courage, responsibility, and love for their family. Whatever happened next, he knew this was one traffic stop that would stay with him forever. In the bright fluorescent lights of the emergency room, Officer Mitchell watched as the medical team worked quickly around baby Emma. Tommy stood pressed against his side, the boy's small frame shaking with each sob as he watched his sister being examined. The scene before them was organized chaos, nurses checking vital signs, a doctor barking orders, and medical equipment beeping urgently. We need to get her temperature down immediately, the doctor announced, her voice calm but firm. Start cool compresses and prepare for blood work. We need to rule out meningitis. Tommy's grip on Mitchell's uniform tightened at the unfamiliar medical terms. The officer knew he needed to handle 2 crucial tasks: contact the children's mother and deal with the official response to Tommy's unauthorized drive. Years of experience had taught him that sometimes the right choice wasn't always the one written in the rulebook. Tommy, I need you to tell me exactly where your mom works in the hospital, Mitchell said, kneeling down to meet the boy's eyes. Which department? She's in the IQ, Tommy answered, his voice barely a whisper. 4th floor. She's been working there since Emma was born. That's why I couldn't reach her. They're not allowed to keep their phones with them during shifts. Mitchell nodded, making a quick decision. Stay right here with your sister. I'm going to find your mom. He gestured to a nurse nearby. Could you please stay with him? The nurse, an older woman with kind eyes, immediately moved to Tommy's side. Of course. Come here, sweetheart. Let's sit down while they help your sister. As Mitchell turned toward the elevator, his radio crackled to life. Unit 247, what's your status on that traffic stop? Do you need backup at the hospital? The officer paused, knowing his next words would set the tone for how this incident would be handled. He thought about the boy in his Superman pajamas, who had risked everything to save his sister. He thought about the single mother working night shifts to support her children, and the impossible situation that had forced a 12-year-old to make an adult decision. Negative on backup, Mitchell responded firmly. Situation under control. Medical emergency involving minors. We'll file full report at end of shift. He took the elevator to the 4th floor, his mind working through various scenarios. The IQ receptionist looked up as he approached, immediately alert at the sight of his uniform. I need to locate Sarah Henderson immediately, Mitchell said. It's about her children. Both of them are in the ER. The receptionist's eyes widened, and she quickly picked up the phone. Within minutes, Sarah Henderson burst through the IQ doors, still wearing her surgical scrubs, her face pale with worry. What happened? Where are my babies? She asked, panic evident in her voice. They're in the ER, Mitchell explained quickly as they walked to the elevator. Emma has a very high fever and Tommy. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Tommy found a way to get her here when he couldn't reach anyone for help. In the elevator, Mitchell gently explained the full situation. He watched as Sarah's expression shifted from fear to shock to a complex mixture of pride and horror as she realized what her son had done. Oh God, he drove the car. She whispered, leaning against the elevator wall. He must have been so scared, but the car. The law. Officer, please. Mitchell held up his hand. Mrs. Henderson, I've been on the force for 15 years. I've seen a lot of wrong decisions made for the right reasons, and a lot of right decisions made for the wrong reasons. What your son did tonight. He paused, making sure she understood his next words clearly. What I saw was a young man who exhausted every safe option before taking a calculated risk to save his sister's life. He drove slowly, used turn signals, and kept the car under control. Those aren't the actions of a reckless joyrider. They're the actions of someone who understood the seriousness of his choice. The elevator doors opened to the ER, and they could see Tommy sitting with the nurse, his eyes fixed on the treatment room where doctors were still working on Emma. I'm going to file this as a medical emergency response, Mitchell said quietly. Not as a traffic violation, but I would like to have a conversation with both of you about setting up some emergency contacts and backup plans so Tommy never has to make a choice like this again. Sarah's eyes filled with tears of relief and gratitude. Thank you, she whispered, then rushed toward her children, leaving Mitchell standing in the hallway, confident that sometimes the most important part of upholding the law was knowing when compassion served justice better than strict enforcement. The emergency room transformed into a blur of intense activity as Sarah Henderson embraced her son Tommy, while the medical team continued working on Emma. Officer Mitchell stood nearby, watching as Dr. Chen, the lead physician, approached the family with a serious expression. Mrs. Henderson, Emma's temperature isn't responding to our initial treatments, Dr. Chen explained. We need to transfer her to Central Children's Hospital immediately. They have a specialized pediatric ICU, and she needs more intensive care than we can provide here. Sarah's face paled. Central Children's? That's 40 minutes away, even with no traffic. We've called for an emergency transport, but all our ambulances are currently responding to a major accident on the highway, Dr. Chen continued. The earliest one can get here is 30 minutes, and given Emma's condition, that might be too long to wait. Tommy, still in his Superman pajamas, gripped his mother's hand tighter. Officer Mitchell stepped forward, his decision already made before the words left his mouth. I can escort them in my patrol car, he offered. With emergency lights, we can get there in 20 minutes. Dr. Chen nodded immediately. That would be ideal. I'll call ahead to let them know you're coming. We'll send a nurse with you to monitor Emma during transport. The next few minutes were a whirlwind of activity. Nurse Rodriguez, a pediatric specialist, quickly gathered emergency supplies while Mitchell radioed dispatch to inform them of the situation. Sarah cradled Emma, who had been hooked up to a portable monitor, while Tommy helped gather their things. Unit 247 to dispatch, Mitchell spoke into his radio. Emergency escort to Central Children's Hospital, requesting all units clear the route from Cedar Grove through downtown. Copy that, Unit 247. Route will be cleared. All available units are being notified. Outside, Mitchell's patrol car sat ready, its lights already flashing. He quickly helped Nurse Rodriguez set up a makeshift treatment area in the back seat, where Sarah would hold Emma during the journey. Tommy climbed into the front passenger seat, his young face set with determination. Everyone secure? Mitchell asked, sliding behind the wheel. After receiving affirmative responses, he activated his siren and pulled out of the emergency bay. The digital clock read 1:15 a.m. as they merged onto the main road. The streets were mostly empty, but Mitchell knew the real challenge would be navigating downtown, even at this hour. He pressed the accelerator, keeping the speed just high enough to make good time while ensuring his precious cargo remained safe. BP's dropping slightly, Nurse Rodriguez reported from the back seat. Emma's temperature is still 104.3. Mitchell pressed the accelerator a bit more, expertly weaving through the scattered traffic. Other cars pulled aside as the patrol car's siren pierced the night air. Tommy sat silently beside him, occasionally glancing back at his sister. You holding up okay, buddy? Mitchell asked, navigating a tricky intersection. Tommy nodded bravely. Yes, sir, I'm just worried about Emma. As they approached downtown, Mitchell's radio crackled with updates from other officers who had positioned themselves along the route, locking intersections to ensure their safe passage. The cooperation of his fellow officers touched Mitchell. They all understood that tonight, every second counted. Halfway there, Mitchell announced as they cleared downtown. How's she doing? Temperature's the same, Sarah replied, her voice tight with worry, but she's starting to get more responsive. The highway stretched before them, eerily empty thanks to the coordinated efforts of local law enforcement. Mitchell maintained a steady speed, his hands firm on the wheel as they ate up the miles. His mind briefly flashed to his own daughter, remembering nights of worry when she was sick as a baby. Tommy's small voice broke through his thoughts. Officer Mitchell, thank you for helping us. Both times. Mitchell glanced at the boy, seeing not just a child who had made a desperate choice earlier that night, but a young man who had shown extraordinary courage under pressure. That's what we're here for, Tommy, he replied softly, to help people when they need it most. The lights of Central Children's Hospital appeared in the distance, a beacon of hope in the dark night. Mitchell's dashboard clock showed 1:34 a.m. They had made the journey in record time. As they pulled up to the emergency entrance, a team of pediatric specialists was already waiting with a gurney. The night was far from over, but as Mitchell watched the medical team whisk Emma away with Sarah and Tommy close behind, he knew that sometimes the most important police work happened without a single arrest or citation being issued. Tonight wasn't about enforcing laws. It was about protecting life in all its small and precious forms. The waiting room at Central Children's Hospital buzzed with quiet tension as Officer Mitchell sat beside Tommy, who had finally dozed off in the uncomfortable plastic chair. Sarah paced nearby, her nurse's scrubs from her interrupted shift a reminder of how quickly their normal night had turned into something else entirely. Dr. Williams, the pediatric specialist, had taken Emma immediately for tests upon their arrival. The first hour had passed in a blur of medical terms and paperwork, with Sarah's professional knowledge both a blessing and a curse as she understood exactly what each test might reveal. Mrs. Henderson, Dr. Williams emerged from the treatment area, his face showing the weariness of a long night shift. Sarah rushed forward, with Mitchell gently waking Tommy. Emma has severe bacterial pneumonia, the doctor explained, his voice gentle but serious. Her right lung is significantly affected, which explains the rapid onset of symptoms. We've started her on strong intravenous antibiotics, and she's responding well to the treatment. Tommy, still groggy from his brief sleep, tugged at his mother's hand. Is Emma going to be okay? Dr. Williams knelt down to Tommy's level, something that made Mitchell appreciate the doctor even more. Thanks to you, young man, we caught this just in time. Another hour or two of delay, and this could have been much more serious. Your quick thinking saved your sister from potential complications. Sarah wrapped an arm around Tommy's shoulders, tears streaming down her face. Can we see her? Of course. Dr. Williams nodded. She's in the pediatric ICU. She'll need to stay here for at least a few days, but the worst is over. As they followed the doctor through the hospital corridors, Mitchell noticed Tommy walking taller, the weight of worry lifting from his young shoulders. The pediatric ICU was a brightly painted space that somehow managed to feel less scary than the regular hospital rooms, despite the serious conditions of its tiny patients. Emma lay in a crib-like hospital bed, connected to various monitors and an IV drip. Her color had improved significantly, and her breathing, though still labored, was stronger. Sarah immediately went to her daughter's side, her medical training and maternal instincts merging as she checked every monitor and tube. Her fever's down to 101.2, Dr. Williams noted, checking the charts. The cooling measures and antibiotics are doing their job. I've scheduled additional chest x-rays for the morning, but I'm optimistic about her recovery. Tommy stood at the foot of Emma's bed, his Superman pajamas now wrinkled from the long night. She looks better, he observed quietly. She's not as red as before. Mitchell watched as Sarah pulled Tommy into a tight hug. You saved your sister's life tonight, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you, even though, she glanced at Mitchell, still worried about the potential consequences of Tommy's drive. Mrs. Henderson, Mitchell stepped forward. I've already decided how to handle the incident. Tommy showed remarkable judgment in an emergency situation. Instead of filing any charges, I'd like to work with you both to create a better emergency plan. Maybe we can set up a network of neighbors who can help if something like this happens again. The relief on Sarah's face was palpable. Thank you, Officer Mitchell. We'd really appreciate that. A small sound from Emma's bed drew everyone's attention. The baby's eyes had opened, and for the first time since the ordeal began, she gave a tiny smile at the sight of her brother. Hey, Emma, Tommy whispered, reaching through the bed rails to hold his sister's tiny hand. You really scared me, you know that? Dr. Williams checked Emma's vitals one more time. She's stable now, but she'll need constant monitoring. One parent can stay overnight. I'll stay, Sarah said immediately, then looked worriedly at Tommy. But I can take Tommy home, Mitchell offered. It's on my way, and he should get some proper rest. As they prepared to leave, Tommy hugged his mother and gently kissed his sister's forehead. The simple gesture spoke volumes about the bond between the siblings, a bond that had proved stronger than fear or uncertainty on this crucial night. Walking back to his patrol car with Tommy, Mitchell reflected on how this night had reminded him why he'd become a police officer in the first place. Sometimes, the most important part of serving and protecting meant recognizing the hero in a 12-year-old boy wearing Superman pajamas, who had risked everything to save his baby sister. 3 days after the dramatic night, Sarah Henderson stood in Emma's hospital room, packing up the last of their belongings. The baby, now fully recovered and giggling in her car seat, showed no signs of the terrifying ordeal she had endured. Dr. Williams had just signed the discharge papers, giving Emma a clean bill of health and praising the quick actions that had saved her from more serious complications. Tommy sat in the room's window seat, still wearing his hospital visitor badge. He hadn't missed a single visiting hour since that night, coming straight from school each day, often with homework spread across his lap as he kept watch over his sister. Mrs. Henderson, a social worker named Ms. Martinez, knocked gently on the doorframe. Do you have a moment to discuss the support services we've arranged? Sarah nodded, setting down the bag she was packing. Over the past few days, the hospital's social services department had been working closely with Officer Mitchell to create a comprehensive safety net for the Henderson family. We've coordinated with your neighbors on Maple Street, Ms. Martinez explained, opening her folder. Mrs. Peterson has agreed to keep her hearing aids in at night and has a new emergency phone by her bed. The Garcias have made a spare key to their house available, and their teenage daughter will be available for backup childcare. Tommy looked up from his homework. And Officer Mitchell gave me his direct number for emergencies, he added proudly. He said I can call him anytime. Sarah wiped away tears as she listened to all the support that had materialized around her family. The past few days had shown her just how much her community cared once they understood her situation. The hospital has also adjusted my schedule, Sarah explained. I'm switching to day shifts starting next week, and they've given me more flexible hours. No more night shifts unless it's absolutely necessary. Ms. Martinez smiled warmly. That's excellent. And don't forget about the emergency childcare service we've arranged. They're available 24/7, and the hospital will cover the cost as part of your employee benefits. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Officer Mitchell stood there in his uniform, having just finished his shift. He'd been checking in on the family regularly since that night, becoming something of a guardian angel to them. Ready for the escort home? He asked, smiling at the scene before him. Just about, Sarah replied, sipping up the last bag. Thank you again for everything, Officer Mitchell. I don't know how we can ever repay you. Mitchell shook his head. Seeing Emma healthy is all the thanks I need. But I did bring something for Tommy. He pulled a small package from behind his back. Tommy opened it eagerly, revealing a new set of pajamas. Instead of Superman, these ones had police badges printed all over them. Cool, he exclaimed, his face lighting up. I thought these might be more appropriate for Cedar Grove's youngest hero, Mitchell said with a wink. As they walked out of the hospital together, Sarah pushing Emma in her stroller while Tommy helped carry the bags, Mitchell noticed how different the family looked from that frightening night just days ago. The fear and desperation had been replaced by hope and security. In the parking lot, Sarah paused. Officer Mitchell, the way you handled everything that night. Most officers would have followed protocol, but you saw the bigger picture. You helped us find solutions instead of just pointing out problems. Mitchell watched as Tommy carefully helped secure Emma's car seat in their sedan, the same car he had daringly driven that night. You know, Sarah, in 15 years of police work, I've learned that sometimes the bravest people are the ones forced to make impossible choices. Tommy didn't just break the law that night, he showed us all what true courage looks like. Ms. Martinez, who had followed them out, handed Sarah a final folder of resources and contact numbers. Remember, you're not alone anymore. Your community is here to help. As the Hendersons prepared to drive home, Tommy suddenly ran back to Officer Mitchell and hugged him tightly. Thank you for believing in me, he whispered. Mitchell knelt down to Tommy's level. You know what, buddy? Sometimes the real superheroes don't wear capes. They wear Superman pajamas and love their families enough to do whatever it takes to protect them. Watching the family drive away, Mitchell reflected on how one traffic stop had created ripples of change throughout the community. Sometimes, he realized, the most important part of law enforcement wasn't enforcing the law at all. It was helping people find their way through their darkest moments and coming out stronger on the other side. 10 years had passed since that fateful night when a 12-year-old boy drove through the streets of Cedar Grove to save his sister's life. The Henderson family had flourished in the decades since, strengthened by the community support system that grew from their crisis. On a bright spring morning, Officer James Mitchell, now a senior sergeant nearing retirement, sat in his patrol car outside the Cedar Grove Police Academy. He watched as the newest class of cadets filed out after their morning training session, his eyes fixed on one particular young man, 22-year-old Tommy Henderson. Tommy had grown into a tall, confident adult, but Mitchell could still see traces of that brave boy in Superman pajamas whenever he smiled. After graduating high school, Tommy had surprised no one by announcing his decision to enter the police academy. Sergeant Mitchell, Tommy called out, jogging over to the patrol car. I didn't expect to see you here today. Mitchell stepped out of his car, smiling. Thought I'd stop by to see how our star cadet is doing. I hear you're top of your class in emergency response training. Tommy's face lit up with pride. Well, I had some early experience with emergency situations, he said with a knowing grin. Actually, I was hoping to catch you today. There's something I'd like to show you. They walked across the academy parking lot to Tommy's car, where he pulled out a framed photograph. It showed Emma, now a beautiful 11-year-old, standing beside her science fair project titled Emergency Response Times and Patient Outcomes. She won first place, Tommy said proudly. Mom helped her with the medical terminology, but it was all her idea. She's already talking about becoming a doctor. Mitchell studied the photo, remembering the tiny, fever-stricken baby from that night. And your mom? How's she doing? She's head nurse in the pediatric unit now, Tommy beamed. She actually started a program at the hospital to help single parents access emergency childcare services. They call it the Henderson Initiative. They walked together toward the academy building, where Tommy's afternoon classes would soon begin. The campus was quiet, with just a few other cadets studying on the lawn. You know, Tommy said thoughtfully, that night changed everything for us, not just because of Emma's recovery, but because it showed us we weren't alone. The way you handled things, it's why I'm here now. I want to be that kind of police officer. Mitchell nodded, understanding completely. Sometimes the badge means knowing when to enforce the law and when to enforce its spirit instead. You learned that earlier than most. Remember those police pajamas you gave me? Tommy laughed. I kept them until they literally fell apart. Emma used to tease me about them, but every time I wore them, I remembered how it felt to have someone believe in me when I'd done something that could have gotten me in serious trouble. They reached the academy entrance, where other cadets were beginning to gather for afternoon sessions. Mitchell placed a hand on Tommy's shoulder, just as he had done 10 years ago in the hospital. 2 more weeks until graduation, Mitchell said. Have you decided which precinct you're hoping for? Tommy's eyes sparkled. Actually, I just got my assignment. Cedar Grove, 3rd Precinct, same as you. Mitchell felt his throat tighten with emotion. Well, Henderson, looks like things are coming full circle. Just remember what I taught you about traffic stops. You never know when you might find a kid in Superman pajamas behind the wheel. They both laughed, but there was understanding in their shared humor. Tommy checked his watch and gathered his books for class. Oh, before I forget, he said, Emma's having a birthday party this weekend. Mom insists you come. She says it's tradition now. You haven't missed one in 10 years. As Mitchell watched Tommy disappear into the academy building, he thought about how one decision, made with compassion rather than strict adherence to protocol, had rippled out to affect so many lives. The scared boy in Superman pajamas had grown into a man determined to help others the way he had been helped. Driving back to his patrol route, Mitchell smiled at the thought of Emma's upcoming birthday party. He already had her gift picked out, a toy doctor's kit, complete with a tiny stethoscope. Some might say he'd gone soft in his later years on the force, but Mitchell knew better. Sometimes the strongest form of justice wasn't found in handcuffs and citations, but in the simple act of believing in someone when they needed it most. The streets of Cedar Grove stretched before him, just as they had on that crucial night a decade ago. But now, thanks to one brave boy's actions and one officer's compassion, they were safer, kinder, and more connected than ever before.